Turn my speech between 3, 2, 1. Side government believes wholeheartedly in a world where corporations are not at the top of the chain of like food chain, who continuously goes unchecked, who continuously keeps destroying without any moral responsibility, without any repercussions to think about, to care about. We do not believe in that work, and we believe we should strongly urge for a work where corporations are significantly held accountable for their actions on the world, which is affecting every individual and every single soul on this world. Understand the problems that is existent under this country, right? Understand that number one, influx of timber products that eventually harm biodiversity of a particular area. We tell you 3.5 million of hectares every year, size of a country like Ireland, is logged because for these timber corporations, right? Who are constantly being driven by profits and whatnot. We tell you every year that is being done, these loggings are done in an unsustainable way. What happens then is that literally hundreds and millions of billions of ringgit are being spent on just by government on just trying to damage control whatever harms these corporations are doing, bulldozing through the lands without caring about anything. We tell you secondarily, the current mechanisms that side opposition might tell you they work is probably ineffective on a larger extent. Why so? Because let's look at the current regulations that exist on timber corporations and whatnot. Number one are the regulations like EUDR or like forest management or government imposing tax on markets in general. We tell you those are non-existent because they still are able to just give a proper or like a greenwashing their company and getting past that without facing any significant repercussions, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to understand they are profit driven who only cares about money and nothing else. But we tell you secondarily, even if you have forest management and whatnot, like reserve forests and whatnot, those are not sufficient only because of the fact that government do not have funding, government do not have resources that they can put onto this management and whatnot to protect the biodiversity of these individuals, right? Because guess what? They are literally spending millions of money just to care about the damages that are done by the corporations in the first place, right? We tell you they never have that money. Our stance today is that we think biodiversity taxes are the best way we can hold these companies accountable, but secondarily on a level, protect the biodiversity, which is eventually the end goal of today's debate, right? Understand firstly how we actually solve the mechanism, right? Number one, I'm going to know how we actually do that. Secondarily, how will the tax be held reportable on the benefits? And fourthly, where will this money will eventually go? Number one, understand the taxes. We're basically using the same principle of income-based taxes onto this case, right? It looks like the taxes will be proportionate to their login, right? To their login or whatever, if a particular company is logging say X% of forest, they will be charged proportionate to that percent, right? They would not be charged, it would not like differ. But also secondarily, we tell you any extra tax will be based on the harm they cause on a particular location. What does that look like? Such as number one, irresponsible or irreplaceable damage to a particular biodiversity. But secondarily, accidental damage on the lives of animals, right? Which oftentimes goes unchecked under current mechanisms. We tell you, and thirdly, we tell you it further incentivizes these particular corporations to follow the sustainable practices that are in place currently, right? We tell you corporations already do risk assessment and mitigation under the current status quo to adhere to regulations like EUDR. So we tell you they do not have to take an extra step to submit that report, right? But secondly, how we will actually report these taxes and whatnot. We tell you their logs will be counted by forest management officers, will be handled by revenue officers and whatnot, and they will have to submit weekly reports on the basis just like a tax file working, right? And thirdly, we tell you this money directly goes to number one, R&D for protection of diseases of trees and biodiversity and whatnot. Secondly, funding to help forest management and everything against illegal poaching or illegal practices, because understand the current status, so forest management is significantly underfunded, so they cannot fight against illegal poachers. Before I move on, your previous slide.
If your problem statement is true, wouldn't all the companies are able to get away just by paying all of those tax?
No. Here's the thing. Understand, both of the worlds will continue to have timber products, right? Because consumer demands will continue to exist under the world. Our world at least uses the money we get from taxes to help put infrastructures in place so that we do not have further harm. Under their world, they have companies going unchecked, companies going without any repercussions and whatnot. Understand, we tell you that this will problem. And then understand why we think it's government's responsibility and right to get that money at the first place. Number one, understand government has a moral right to protect protect its citizens, and secondarily protect its nature and land and territory. Right? We told you hundreds of billions of damages, billions of money are put into protecting or repairing the damages that are done in the virtue of landslides, floods, and whatnot that occur solely due to the reason of unsustainable logging practices or timber companies doing whatever they want, right? We tell you those, at least in those cases, you can funnel the money back into those so that you don't have to spend the money of citizens themselves into damages. At least under their work, you can use the money for forest management and whatnot. But thirdly, we tell you that we also ensure that exploitation of land does not take place, right? That means the moment in time you put a tax is the moment in time these companies are more aware of what they are doing, right? They have a check and balance mechanism that allows these corporations to not go unchecked. Is the moment in time this corporation will now have an added incentive to protect their risk mitigation and whatnot, right? Because understand they are profit driven and whatnot, right? But thirdly, we told you that damages of timbers get so extensive that you have spend more money on just repairing the rights and whatnot. But on an impact that is exclusive to our side is the biodiversity is prioritized under our work, which never happens under their work. Because government is so focused on repairing the damage. Government is so focused just trying to stop the illegal deforestation and whatnot. Biodiversity never gets a fighting chance to be prioritized. At least under our work, we use the money to protect the biodiversity of land. We use the money to fund research and development, which can help at least cater to this land. The impact then is also that these taxes can also make sure the fear of excessive logging that never occurs under our law, which my second speaker will further on. We tell you we should not let these companies keep bullying us into letting them do whatever we want. At least give them a check and balance mechanism so we have a fighting chance.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Prime Minister, for the fine speech. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition here.
benefit or direction that's coming from opposition side, from government side, given the fact that they never really proved to you what is the likely benefit of this taxation that is going to be imposed by them, given the fact that firstly they say that they want to actually tax these industries because they need the money or they need the actual money for to develop certain areas of the industry or develop the sustainable industry in itself. Firstly, we don't really understand why exactly they only need to tax, why exactly they don't have enough money, which means they have to tax only this certain industry, only the timber industry in itself. Because understand that there are other avenues where the government itself can tax, for example, like the oil or the other industries that exist inside the in itself, which means that we don't understand why exactly we exclusively only have to tax the timber industry. Because government already gets a lot of money from different sectors of tax in itself. We'll explain to you why exactly this is convoluted argument of taxing only the timber sector. And the more you, and they say that the more that you tax money under their side, the more you have to the more you tax money onto these, the more the people under their side is logging, the more they'll be taxed, right? What exactly is the safety net to this? Because understand that corporations or companies that actively timber have a lot of money, which means that they're able to be paid off all the tax, or they're able to get away or get a leeway with doing more timber or logging process. What is the counter set on our side? What do we prefer? Firstly, subsidization, which means the government is going to allocate specific amounts of money towards companies to grow. What do I mean by grow? It means firstly, being able to implement sustainable forestry by imposing forest reserves or replanting trees. But secondly, we're going to have a lot more research into the sustainable way in which we can have the timber industry to flourish, right? And the reasoning and the question posited by government side is that how exactly would they have the money to actually give subsidization or allocation to these companies itself? Understand that we already told you that there are other avenues in which the government gets money inside a scope, like taxing other industries, like getting profit off of that, and using that money to actually fund subsidies for these industries. If the problem was about environmental causes or the damage that it was on these industries, we posit to you that the solution to that is actually using the money or the profit that the government gets from other taxation into spending it onto just giving subsidization for this industry to actually become much more greener in itself, right? Then moving on to the first argument then, where taxation increases the cost of timber industry and that harms the people on the ground in itself. So how exactly does biodiversity taxation increase the cost of production? Firstly, taxing things that are necessary for timber industry makes you increase the cost of production for the timber industry in itself. Because the reason to this is that all of the products that are used in cultivating timber in itself, like pesticides or things that are giving out carbon emissions, are the ones that will be taxed by biodiversity that will be imposed under their side. But even if it's not through taxation, you're forcing these companies in itself to become more greener, and you're using even more money to do that, right? And what happens then? Secondly, and what happens when you do that then? Secondly, you hike up the process of the supply chain. You understand that there's a lot of raw materials that you need to produce in the timber industry in itself, which means you hike up the prices in that supply chain in itself. And the reason is, when you want to have a biodiverse tax, you have to tax their supply chain as well, which means every single supply chain is being taxed continuously, which means the total cost of that product or production will increase exponentially, which means in a situation where you do that, then the first harm is the cost increase. When the cost increases, it becomes hard for those industries to maintain the scale of the profit margin in itself, right? This means you have to lay off workers in order to maintain the company in itself, because you can't pay off those workers in itself. And all those people are laid off of their job, right? They don't have an alternative because they're blue-collar workers in itself, right? Which means they don't have the credit or access for other jobs. But secondly, the second harm then is they increase the price of timber in order to maintain the scale of the profit margin in itself. And this is harmful because a lot of people, a lot of companies rely on those timber and wood, and all the products will increase by virtue of the taxation imposed by them, right? And in the prices in itself, which means people's life will be miserable because they have to face the inflation that is imposed when you have these taxes onto these timber companies. The way to this argument is that the harms of taxation or taxation that causes inflation is immediate. Under their side of the house, the harms that they want to posit, like climate change by these timber industries, is not immediate, which means this is a debate-winning argument because the harms of the life of people are huge and proximate and immediate, because the harms of inflation can be seen immediately, right? And then moving on to the second argument then about how this harms the narrative of greener change. Because first, we already proved to you that a lot of products increase, a lot of products will increase in price when they impose this taxation, so people will lose their job in itself, right? So what is likely going to happen when you have that increased prices? Firstly, the narrative will be people will be hating on the green movement in itself, because the tax that imposed by their side has harmed their life. And even if it's not true, a lot of people are already affected by the taxation and are already affected directly by the taxation and already lose their jobs in itself under that taxation process, right? So why do you think it's harmful? Yeah, because yes.
Please engage with the whole framing and don't be uncharitable, because we've told you that all of these negative impacts is why we have to introduce these taxes to stop MNCs from causing logging. Please engage.
Yes, understand that we are also finding a solution, which is subsidizing these companies into implementing more sustainable ways or sustainable development in itself, right? We already told you that they have to implement sustainable forestry, which means that obviously they have to prove and show their result of carbon emissions in itself. But it's not just going to be free money by the government, right? You have to prove all your evidence and carbon emission in itself, right? Then why exactly is this harmful? Because it makes it hard for people to have like a societal acceptance of the green movement because they are already affected by the taxation process. And this is problematic because what is likely going to happen is that they won't support or implement any greener ways, which means they are less likely for people to be on board with the green ways in order to improve like the greener technology in itself. And a lot of our people are going to like oppose the greener regulations because firstly it's already ruining their life, and secondly they're less likely to support it because like there's no incentive for them to do so. The comparative is under their side, under our side, we don't do anything. We let people like the green movement to slowly propagate their ideas of the green movement in itself without making things worse. People, they have the autonomy to decide whether or not or how to propagate that green movement in itself, which means it will get more acceptance by the people because you aren't enforcing people to actually pay these taxes and increasing the cost of production from these companies and paying higher prices, which means it will be much more acceptable. The way is, if it is true that government's main goal is green change, we argue that their change is less likely to happen because they don't support the green changes. The people on the ground don't support the green changes because they pay higher prices and they live a lot worse rate. So let the green movement solve by themselves.
Alright, thank you, the leader of opposition, for the speech. Now, like by Deputy Prime Minister. Here you go. Also for debaters, when discussing, please go ahead.
Couple things I'm going to do in my speech. First, I'll be giving out a few key responses as to opposition's entire case that they brought up, which I find problematic in the very least. But secondly, I'll be expanding on my Prime Minister's speech. I'll be giving out my own argumentation. Firstly, a couple of responses. Two problems I have with the opposition's case, right? Firstly, they try to call out benefits that we proved to you, we posited to you, without positing any necessary without doing any necessary giving us these incentives that these companies are going to actually enforce this regulation in the first place, right? We tell you, okay, sorry, I'll get into that later. But then secondly, they didn't engage in our, there was no engagement on their side on our argument on the MNCs exploiting these things in the first place, right? We tell you that the only reason, that the entire reason we want to impose this tax is that these big companies who are doing the crux of the damage we see on the environment, these are these MNCs, and we have to find a way to curb them. First, a couple of responses. They gave us an argumentation that, oh, you have to now tax the supply chain, now we harm these people on the ground. But I don't think they give actually enough structural reasons as to why this is inherently bad in the first place as far as the end goal that we're trying to save the environment, right? We will bite the bullet and we'll say that we're okay with like laying off a couple of these workers insofar as we don't think it's good that they get to keep the job as far as they're harming the environment and they're harming the biodiversity of our nation in the first place, right? But then they come to you and they tell us, oh, they give us this weird case about wanting to subsidize these companies and giving them incentives somehow to, get them to enforce greener policies. Two things here, right? Their side only gives these MNCs, these corporations, options. They gave them the money on top of the illegal logging that they were already doing. But then they didn't do anything to enforce that they're going to do these regulations in the very first place. At least our side posits to you a mechanism in which we make it necessary, we make it compulsory, and it's not a choice, right? There is enforcement on our side. Later. But then thirdly, the problem we have with that is that suddenly they're going to have so much money to be able to subsidize these huge multinational companies in the first place, right? I wonder where all this money comes from. At least in our side, we'll go so far as to say we help with this, we have with the mechanism better, where we are able to tax these MNCs, we at least get revenue from that. I don't think they have the sustainable capital to be able to maintain this mechanism in the long run. I think their case falls down right there, right? But then here's the thing, right? Why do we want to actually impose this tax in the first place? My Prime Minister stood up and told you all of the bad harms it has on the environment as far as these companies doing excessive logging, unsustainable practices. We tell you that this is the only way to do this, right? Couple of things here. Firstly, we want to make these MNCs fear excessive logging in the first place, right? What is this necessarily causing to you? We tell you right now that companies right now don't necessarily fear it as so far as they don't have a problem going against these policies, right? We told you that there are some policies in place, maybe the government has, enforced some certain policies, but we see that these problems are still happening and they don't have a problem with going against it. Why is this happening, right? Couple things. Firstly, the lack of the strict enforcement of these policies in the first place, and secondly, the consequences it has on these MNCs in the first place. Right? We tell you that only by taxing them, right, we give these consequences something that they actually burdens them in the long run. But secondly, we feel that people are, in general, we're desensitized to these kind of things happening. As far as the people who aren't affected by these natural disasters, by the disasters that are caused by it, we don't think that until we take action, people aren't going to take action. But thirdly, understand that these multinational companies necessarily means that they are profit driven, and as far as their profits are not affected, as far as we're not taking money from them, they won't care, right? Why would they care, right? But fourthly, we tell you that okay, they have some form, I suppose they have some form of lobbying power as far as the powerful MNCs. They're just going to go against these regulations and they wouldn't face any consequences later. 5 minutes. But then secondly, right, why do you think these taxes will actually make these MNCs fear excessive logging, or actually going as far as going against these regulations and harming the biodiversity in the first place? Firstly, the cost of the excessive logging proportionately increases, as far as my Prime Minister already told you. We tell you that as far as they're doing more and more excessive logging, as far as they're going to harm the biodiversity even more, they have to pay more, right? This necessarily will hurt the profit margin or the revenue that they gain. We tell you that this, as far as there are companies that they want to expand, they want to build new infrastructure, buy new equipment, we think that this is going to necessarily harm them in the long run. We tell you that this mechanism is sustainable because we're telling you that we're going to implement this taxation. They have to pay every time they're going to keep excessively logging. We tell you that there are checks and balances created in the mechanism that my Prime Minister has told you. I would go so far as to say that these checks and balances get even stronger in the future, as far as these MNCs now actually have incentive to make the greener and better regulations and policies, as far as they don't want to keep paying these excessive taxes. But okay, I'll take it.
If your argument is to suggest that regulation doesn't work and you cannot enforce any regulation, how exactly are you going to enforce taxation? Wouldn't they just tax evade you?
Okay, thank you so much. I'll take it later. Hold on. Okay, but then secondly, right, I'll go so far as to say this will actually incentivize these MNCs to create their better logging policies within their own sector, as far as they don't want to keep paying these excessive taxes. We tell you that number one necessary characterization is that they are profit driven and they care about their profit margins. As long as this isn't affected, nothing is going to change, right? Even if you want to subsidize them, we don't think there's enough of an incentive to actually enact them to catalyst the change in that sector. But then secondly, okay, we tell you that this is now necessarily going to incentivize them to create better ways to better control their logging sustainably, as far as they won't have to pay as much taxes as they would otherwise have done. Understand that we need to create this fear of taxation. As far as we're putting this mechanism in place, it's particularly important to understand this because this will now make these MNCs fear losing that money and having to pay more. Right? We tell you that they also have to take into account other costs, even if they're multi-billion dollar companies. We tell you that it's not just taxes that they have to adhere to. There are so many other things that they have to cater to, and there's only so much that they can pay. As far as these taxes get into a high point that is unrealistic, that they're just going to keep paying it. We tell you that it's unrealistic. These companies are just going to blatantly waste their money on these taxes, so far as they can find other alternatives. Right? We tell you that they're going to necessarily want to avoid losing money, and this will make them take initiative to create better policies and regulations. Right? It will actually, as far as it's going to reduce the effects of that tax on them, and they won't have to pay as much as they would otherwise have. In the event, we already told you also, in the event that damages happen, floods and landslides happen in the areas that they have excessively logged, so far as that was created by them, they would also have to pay additional taxes. We tell you that these MNCs would necessarily want to avoid this in the first place. We tell you that the way, we tell you that even if you want to tell us that they're just going to, they're going to avoid, we tell you that these check and balances already happen, but then even if they want to avoid, right, we tell you that at least there's a net benefit and we gain more money that goes back into funding for better sustainability and better forestry management in the environment.
Alright, thank you Deputy Prime Minister for the speech. Now I'd like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition. Thank you.
If you don't believe any of the positive benefits that Kamila argued to you, you have to believe the harm that she explained to you. Because all the harms of taxation will always happen, where people lose jobs, where people have no ability to buy food because of the inflation that happens, where all the people are going against the green movement because we believe that the green movement itself is actually harming their life. All of these things harm the ability for you to be able to create greener changes. And I want to point out, their burden is very huge in this debate. They say that they're going to solve climate change. But the problem here is that their mechanism is at best to suggest that, one, we're going to tax these people and therefore these people for some reason is going to stop all of this logging. Two, for some reason these people is going to actually practice all of these things. The first thing I want to point out is that none of the argument coming from Kamila was engaged. They never explained to you why exactly this company are not going to lay off these workers. At best, like even worse, they actually concede that these workers are actually going to be laid off. Yes, I'm just going to make a simple comparative. Because what's exactly going to happen is that in order for them to be able to keep their margin high, they have to choose, do I have to pay taxation or do I have to buy alternatives? Here's what the alternative is not going to be much cheaper. In fact, I would argue it will be much more expensive compared to the taxation itself. The first reason is because a lot of the alternative that they want to suggest, there's not enough research and development into it yet, which means that all this product is still in the development age, which means that they have to spend a lot of money into this development in order for them to be able to access it to begin with. But second and more importantly, even if it's true that they can actually access all of these things, in a lot of situations it's going to be very expensive because a lot of companies who actually produce all these greener alternatives are very the pioneer of all of these things, which means that they're going to charge a lot of money. What's the conclusion here? The conclusion here is that all those products are going to be expensive, and if their argument is about why exactly company wants to keep their the scale of their profit margin, what that means is that they have to find other way to actually cut down all of their costs. We tell you that what's likely going to happen is that they're going to cut down all of the they have to lay off a lot of workers. And I want to be clear, because of that, in order for them to have an impact towards this company, the cost of the taxation must be very, very huge. Which means that what's likely going to happen is that a lot of workers is going to be laid off. Which means that 100,000, the 10,000 workers within the timber industry are going to be laid off. But even if you do not buy that, it's going to be little. Who cares, right? These are most important people, because the people who work in the timber industry do not have other alternatives. In a lot of situations, those are the farmer and also the people who live in the rural area that need to cut down trees, that need to be able to maintain all of those trees to begin with. Which means that these are the people who are the most vulnerable, and they are more likely unlikely to be able to find jobs, which means they harm those lives of those people even worse. If their arguments about moral obligation, I tell you they condemn these millions of lives into the worst state of life. They're not fulfilling their moral obligation. The second thing I want to do, I'll take you later. The second thing I want to deal is that their arguments about regulation is not enough. Let's be real here, right guys? Their argument is very uncharitable. Because if their argument is that regulation doesn't work, how exactly are you going to... Let's be charitable and assume that taxation could work, and they have to also agree that regulation could work. Because if not, then their argument also cannot be applicable. The problem here, and this is the extension to Kamila's argument, is that you are taking away a huge political capital that is necessary for the greener change. Why is that the case? The first thing I want to prove here is that there's only a lack of political capital towards that greener change. And there's few reasons why. The first is because a lot of green movement are seen very elitist. The fact that it seems like they don't care about the people on the ground. The fact that there's already a lot of narrative that they are coming from the Western propaganda trying to collectively destroy your country or take over your country. The fact that a lot of people do not believe that Earth is important, or the fact that there's a lot of flat earther in the world itself shows that why exactly people do not care about the Earth, because they do not believe in science. The problem here is that means that they are unlikely to actually believe that it is necessary for us to impose any kind of greener change in terms of regulation and also policy. Why is this important? Because what will happen then, if you implement all of these things, that means that you have used up all of your political capital. And the problem here is that the corporations are able to just say that we don't need more cooperation, we don't need more regulation in the future, because we already have enough regulation. We already use all of these things. But even worse, Kamila's argument makes it even worse, because Kamila explained to you that the perception of the people when they lose their job, when all of this green regulation making them not being able to live their life properly, all of these things makes it far, far worse for you to be able to maintain your political capital in order to get greener changes in the future. Why is this harmful? Because if it is true that they want to get greener changes, this argument proves to you why exactly greener changes and green regulation are unlikely to be enforced and unlikely to be actually achieved on that side of the house, and that's very harmful. The comparative on our side of the house, at the very least, we're able to just let the green movement to keep their political capital and continuously get the better regulation in order to actually protect their life. Let's deal with the next thing coming from that side of the house, but before that, I'll take that POI.
Given the world is striving to reduce dependency on unsustainable products like timber, why is it a bad thing that timber products eventually cease to exist?
This is from the state perspective. Why is this important? Because if that's the case, your moral obligation is towards your people first, rather than dealing with the climate change second. And the reason is because if the people on the ground are keep dying or like not being able to have jobs or like you have to actually like, not being able to access food, what that means is that you have to spend a lot of money in order to take care of them, which means that you are unable to actually live your life. Compared to like with climate change, all of those things are very like in the future, which means that it is not that important compared to like this issue. But let's deal with their argument, because they say that all of these things can actually harm the life of the people. I want to argue three things here. The first is that I want to point out is that in a lot of situations, the corporation will not actually do things that will harm the people on the ground, such as bulldozing their house or bulldozing all those areas for a few reasons. The first is because it's going to be very unpopular within those areas, because the fact that if they continuously do that, there will be a huge protest coming from the people on the ground. That means that the government have to take action against it. Because if the government do not actually take action against it, that means there will be huge like it will be very like unpopular towards the government, which means that they are more likely going to lose the election in the future. There's a huge incentive for them to actually take action. But secondly, and more importantly, in order for like all these corporations to come to those areas and bulldoze those areas, they need to have a license. I don't think like you can go against the regulation of like just bulldozing people's houses, which is why you're able to mitigate all of these things. Third and finally, right, they haven't actually proven to us why exactly like for some reason like just because you do all this logging and at that point equals to like people are losing all of their house, there's no linkage there, which means that you cannot buy their argument. But the argument coming from outside of the house to explain to you why exactly the harms of the people losing their life is very, very much worse. Let's weigh out. Because our argument explains to you that people are going to lose all of their jobs. If it's about money, on our side of the house, we explain to you that government have to spend a lot of money. And weighing it is very important, because the money in order to take care of the people on the ground will be used up for, like the money that could have been used to invest into like green technology and greener stuff will be used up in order to take care of the people on the ground, because they keep losing their jobs and they keep losing their house. On that side of the house, maybe they get some of money out of it, right? But the problem is that the money itself is not going to be enough, because all those money will have to be used in order to take care of people on the ground, which means that any of the benefits of like making sure that people are actually like, you know, like new green technology and stuff like that is unlikely for them to be able to access. The conclusion of my speech is very simple. They haven't engaged with any of our harm, which means that they cannot win this debate because the harm of taxation is bigger.
Alright, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for the speech. Now I invite Gus here.
side opposition up until this point has been extremely convenient in the whole case because they have not engaged with our premise at all from the beginning, from the first speaker up until the second, and they're trying to say that we are unengaging, right? We tell you that that isn't the case because we've told you that taxes are paid, and even if they aren't paid to the extent that you're thinking of, at least we are able to get money, as opposed to you somehow trying to get subsidies from thin air that is funneled back into these industries, right? Secondly, we tell you that these people Secondly, we tell you that opposition has been running our whole case for us from the beginning because other than they haven't proved the exclusivity of their subsidies at all. So in a way, they are running the same thing that they were doing just without the label of taxing the environment, the loggers, right? So we tell you that you should credit us on that point. Moving on to questions in this debate. Then, first of all, which side better protects the environment and countries? And secondly, which side better creates better policies, right? To this effect, we've told you a few things, right? SuBaHaNa and Nabil consecutively have told you that that the influx of excessive timber products has caused there to be rampant destruction of land and forests and floods that reach all of these spaces, which then translates into all of the stakeholders that die on our side, as you propose, also dying on your side. Understand that without way to circumvent all of these problems, the same people die on your side, and in fact tenfold, because you're only protecting workers under your side and you're not protecting every other person by solving the root problem of the environment. You're saying that we're not protecting the people because we're taxing them. We tell you that by taxing these entities and these MNCs, we are able to better cater to the environment. By virtue of that, we cater to the people. Please engage on that later. I don't think we can by that point. But moreover, we've told you that the current mechanisms are ineffective. You've done nothing to prove that the regulations that you guys are trying to propose are effective to any quantum. And moreover, we've told you that things such as the EUDR and all of these things are produced by profit-driven MNCs. So if anything, without the taxation and without any checks and balances that you guys have under your side, which is already substantively proven to you are ineffective, you necessarily don't achieve all of the benefits that you are proposing, and understand that you have no solvency on your side because of that. We've also told you that our taxes are going to be proportionate to the logging and timber activities. So understand that stakeholders that aren't logging a lot won't be taxed a lot. We also told you that any extra tax that will be given based on the damage, and that it will be funneled back into the government then for these biodiversity developments, right? No engagement on that. Understand that then that biodiversity development causes there to be less pollution and less environmental hazards that occur, less people die on our side. I'm going to bring the deadlock between that later, right? Also, talking about opposition says three things basically. They say that they want to that our side increases the cost of the timber industry. Secondly, that the products will then increase in price, and this helps people on the ground, which then is a negative side of the argument. Understand that this is extremely engaging because we've told you again and again and again that we're okay with that. We take the shooter, we take the bullet. People are going to die, fine. But we tell you that A, this pushes MNCs to find alternatives. B, this reduces excessive logging which kills thousands of people yearly, and C, this protects the future of the children of the very workers that you are trying to protect. Understand, you are only prima facie protecting these people in status quo. You're not ensuring that these people are continuously going to be protected in perpetuity. We take the win on that clash. Moreover, thirdly, they say that they want to get better environment by virtue of subsidy. I'm confused because we're doing the exact same case, right? I said before that they necessarily have to prove the exclusivity of their case. Nothing on the whole side is exclusive. They don't win on that clash. Understand that the whole of opposition up until now has been running our case for us, and I hope that the whip can somehow salvage this for them. Because understand in this regard two things. First of all, we barely buy timber products anyways. The most often one-off purchases by virtue of like furnitures and houses. They're not buying wooden products, they're not buying all of these things which are again and again and again. If you're going to talk about paper, understand that we have sustainable options on our side. By reducing these logging attempts, people are going to be using the ready available paper, and even if that's the case, understand that the amount of paper that exists in the world already is sufficient for people to be able to use them anyways. We don't need to then cut down more logging to be able to cater to this, because if we have these taxes, understand that these MNCs are going to be paying so much that they're going to be forced to find alternatives. Go ahead.
So basically you're just against logging, but your first speaker told us that logging can never be reduced on either side of the house.
Understand that we're trying to mitigate that to a certain extent. Insofar as we're able to tax and we're able to infringe upon the profits of these MNCs, they are going to be forced to find alternatives so that logging is not as rampant as it is under status quo. Logging will happen. Yes, we understand that that's something that we cannot trade off. But understand that even though logging still happens, it's going to be lesser under our side. You necessarily have to prove that will not happen, right? So then onto impacts for this first issue. The quantum of taxes, the quantum of the taxes affects these MNCs in such a proportion that they will be forced to comply, because if they don't, they're not going to be able to keep up with the taxes that they're going to be able to do, to be able to feed into the demands that people are trying to do. Because of this, the alternatives then will have to be cheaper, because there's going to be a higher demand, more people are going to buy into it, and because of that, alternatives are going to be cheaper. Yeah, you're going to say that for a time being, we're going to take the trade-off, and for a time being, things will be more expensive. But by virtue of having these taxes, things are going to get less expensive in the long run. Secondly, these MNCs will be forced to comply because of all of the reasons I've mentioned. Thirdly, less logging then equals to less harms on the people on a net value, because people are not dying through the floods and all of the deforestation that happens due to the landslides that exist under status quo that they have not defended up until this point. The comparative then is simple, panel. Understand that on a weighing of solvency, we're able to get you better solvency because we have taxation and we have avenues by which these people are forced to cooperate, and which they are forced to find other avenues by which everyone is supposed to comply by, right? Under that side, they only try to rely on our benefits without doing any legwork to prove that the comparative is actually true, right? Okay, second issue, which side creates better policies? We've told you, A, corporations don't feel it now. B, these taxes will create a fear of polluting until this mechanism is sustainable, which they have not refuted on the mechanism being sustainable at all. It still stands until now. Nabil told you, on top of that, regulations do exist, but they are insufficient to create change. Understand then, they said that we're going to subsidize. They said that policies will harm workers. They say that the state perspective is to cater to the people. Why are you caring about the environment? And they have, I've already answered all of that in my response before this, but first of all, they don't prove at all how they're going to subsidize and how the policies that they're going to have somehow caters to the workers. Impacts and weighing. Then understand that our worst case is that MNCs will evade tax to a certain extent, but understand that we still get money to repair / maintain forests, because if you don't do this, you can replant the forest, but you can't replant all of the flora and fauna under there. Their best case is that these workers don't die, yes. But understand that this logging and this flooding is going to happen in perpetuity, and more people are going to die on their side. For all those reasons, side for government. Thank you.
Alright, thank you Dr. for the speech. Now I give an option to end the substantive portion of the debate. Thank you.
Before we get carried away by the expressive nature of side government, I want to really clarify on what are the important issues in this debate. First of all, the question that has to be asked is whether taxation really affects and helps climate change, or at least by the framing of the government, it helps create a better nation or a better world where we can solve climate change at the end of the day, and we need to identify whether taxation really is the key towards that. And secondly, at the end of the day, really what happens when we tax the nation, and what happens to the people around us, and what are the stakeholders at the end of the day. These are the things that have to really be clarified in order for the government to prove whether taxation should really be applied, and whether that is the best solution towards solving the problem of excessive logging or the problem that they want to push on side government, right? Further clarification, right? First of all, side government push the idea that, they push the idea that we never clash with them regarding the issue of sustainability, and but to counter that, we tell you that they never clash on us regarding the issue of the stakeholders and people who are affected by logging, right? Their basic claim and their basic argument is to say that yes, we tax people, because we tax people, then we save the environment, and when we save the environment, then less people die. And they argue that well, they save people because when more taxation, there's less floods or less whatever landslides and stuff like that, right? my easy response to that is if you tax the people or corporations who do logging at the end of the day, and logging will still happen, and even though you tax them or not, it will still happen and people will still die at the end of the day, right? We tell you the burden of walking through one-side opposition is that we tell you that these people who are the majority and who are consumers on our side have the incentive to buy things, have a livelihood, right? We tell you that there is proximate when taxation is applied towards timber, right? Why? Why do we prove this? That we tell you on side opposition that first of all, we tell you that when taxation happens, there is a price increase towards this taxation, and corporations have to increase the price to cater towards this this articulated to this taxation, right? Thus, at the very least, we show you that there is direct connection towards the consumers at the end of the day, and this is how it burdens the consumers, right? Okay, moving on. On rebuttal on how side government tries to bring their argument, right? They tell you that they want to apply a taxation system where they do it in a way that they use the income system, right? Response to this, right? First of all, I tell you this is problematic because at the end of the day, when you create a taxation system, it creates a narrative where it is a green light towards to do something, right? It provides on side government that they create a narrative where the constitutions or the corporations who do logging at the end of the day have to pay taxes to log at the end of the day, right? This does not solve the excessive logging problem. It just gives another step towards the corporations to do the logging at the end of the day, right? It doesn't stop them from logging excessively at the end of the day. It does nothing more than that, right? It just gives another extra step towards doing that. If at the very best case, it gives a little bit of harm, but these nations, these corporations, like they refer to are MTC. These are multinational corporations who have extensive money, and then taxation really can't harm them at the end of the day. And that's what was also argued by Deputy Leader of Opposition, I think BOI.
Sir, please weigh out to it specifically why the people's life on the timber specifically is more important than people's life who is being directly affected by climate change all over the world.
Alright, so you asked for weighing, right? Okay, let's make this simple, right? Taxation and weighing on people on the ground, right? Really understand, kind of, that the harm of climate change is less than the harms are indirect towards the consumers or the people at the ground, right? Why? First of all, we talk about the scale of harm, right? When you talk about scale of harm, you have to understand the proximity of all these taxations is towards the consumer, right? Why? First of all, we tell you that taxation causes these timber products to be used more to raise in price, and this causes inflation towards the society, right? What happens then, right? This looks like people losing their jobs. This looks like people having to pay more for the necessities that they use each and every day, right? They argue with the fact that there are alternatives and people will not use timber at the end of the day, right? We argue that that's just a very uncreditable claim, because most people do use timber at the end of the day, and even if people didn't use timber that much, we still argue that the increase of price on timber does affect the majority, as to say that people have to spend more to use these timber products at the end of the day. We relate that to how actually on our side we prove that that by increasing price, you reduce the likelihood of people going towards a greener future, right? We tell you on our side, right? When you increase the price of these, when you apply taxation, then the prices are increased, right? Then people are less inclined to actually use greener products. People are less inclined to use all these products at the end of the day, leading to more people going against these greener products. People won't use wood, people will use plastic regardless because it would be cheaper at the end of the day. And that's what happens when you put taxation into the picture, right? This is the problem that is faced on side government, right? And the problem on that case, right? Also, regarding that, we have to talk about how our side gives mitigation towards the harms of taxation at the end there. We tell you that we mitigate the harms at the very least, right? We tell you that first of all, inflation does not, usually drop after it raises, right? We tell you that inflation usually gradually goes up, right? We tell you that climate change on our side, like I explained as Michael, climate change is something that happens far in the future, and at least in the very least, at least we cater the problem now rather than in the future, right? We tell you that inflation is something that's very direct and very proximate towards the people. Therefore, that's why it's very most important thing in our debate today, right? How we combat climate change and how they combat climate change, right? Government says they combat climate change by making taxation, so companies are less incentivized to do so. But I feel like the fact of the matter is that they prove that these multinational companies will actually be affected by the taxation anyways, therefore it cannot be credited on their side. At least at the very least, we say on our side, we directly impact or help these consumers and ensure that they are not harmed by the inflation that is caused when taxation is applied. At the very least, we tell you that we don't want taxation to disincentivize following the green trend, or basically following the good trend of using natural products and timber at the end of the day. For all those reasons, I believe that side opposition take this case on the wing of both government and opposition. And if you want timber to be used more, if you want cheaper timber, cheaper paper, cheaper newspapers, go for side opposition.
Thank you all for the speech. Now to begin the reply portion of the debate, I'd like to invite opposition reply. Here.
I begin my speech. 3, 2, 1. 4 questions I want to answer in this speech. First, can taxation actually reduce any kind of the harm that the government side wants to actually introduce? I want to point out that I don't know how exactly are they going to actually enforce this taxation. Because according to them, for some reason regulation that they exist, for some reason regulation cannot actually be enforced towards corporation. And if that's true, then that also means that in a lot of situations, corporations are more likely going to evade all of your taxation. And that's what they've been doing in the status quo. If they want to actually have like their mechanisms work, they also have to agree that to some extent regulation can actually work. What that means is that if their argument is about how exactly like the taxation can, like all this taxation can be enforced, they also have to believe that the license could exist on our side in order to control the corporation. But even if you don't buy that, I just don't know how exactly they prove that the corporation will just reduce all of the things that they want to talk about in terms of the harm. Because for some reason, and the intuition from here is that even after you tax like alcohol industry and also smoking industry, they are still huge, right? And they still continue to do the things that they want. Because after you tax them, what happens is that they have to shift and adapt into the taxation. And this is why like, all the harms that we explained to you. Because more often than not, they decided to actually lay off all their workers, or they adapt into a more expensive thing and make the people pay all of those expensive expenditure, which means that the product itself become expensive, or people lose their job. That was the case coming from the side of opposition, wasn't imaged by the side of government. They never explained why exactly that's not likely going to happen. Let's deal with the second question then, which is that, and the conclusion to the first issue is that at no point they're able to explain to us why exactly taxation are able to change the incentive of like the corporation. At best, they just assume that for some reason the corporation is just going to change, like to become greener after like they have been taxed. Second question then, which side harms more people? The first thing I want to point out is that the other main harm is that about why exactly like the climate change will actually harm the people on the ground. But the problem here is that even if you tax those corporations, I don't think you are able to resolve all those problems. Why? Because if it is true, it's because of like there's not enough greener change and greener alternative and greener pesticide. All of those things, even if you implement, the climate change effects already exist, which means that it will still exist on that side of the house. But second and more importantly, a lot of like the climate change effects are usually like 5 to 10 years in the future, whereas the harm that we explained to you about losing jobs and losing like not like all the inflation affects people on the day right now, and more importantly, they lose a lot of money in order to be able to survive. That's very harmful in nature. But I want to point out as well is that even if it's true that you are going to actually have a taxation, and their goal here is for some reason to reduce people from logging, they literally agreed in their argument that people will continuously actually log on that side of the house as well. They say that at the very least we're going to get a bit of benefits. Either A, they move into towards greener stuff, which we argue to you is not important because you're already going to harm people. But two, is that they're going to get money. That's the second question we're going to answer. Why exactly, which side will get more money? Because their contention is that they're going to have a lot of money. But the problem we explained to you is that if it is true that people are losing a lot of their jobs, if the inflation is causing a lot of problems to people on the ground, the government has to spend even more money from even bigger compared to the taxation itself in order to be able to like pay off all these things, because inflation affects everyone in the world, everyone in the nation instead of like that specific area, which means that they don't have enough money to be able to buy themselves. You have to subsidize everything. That's very harmful. But if just say that nobody use paper, guess what guys? We all use paper. We all also use a lot of products that actually have timber and wood, which is why it's going to spend a lot of money on that side of the hub. Which means the hubs of like all of these things is going to be much bigger on the government. We at the very least are able to reduce the burden on the government even without this taxation to begin with. The final question I want to answer is which side are more likely going to get greener change? I want to point out their goal is to actually get greener change. They never actually argue how exactly you're going to get greener change. Why exactly this is important? Because our two arguments explain to you why exactly one, they're going to lose the societal capital in order to get the support towards like the greener change. But two, they're also going to lose all the political capital in order to get this regulation and also like greener change. What that means is that on that side of the house, if they implement all of these things, what's likely going to happen is that in the future, there's no ability to actually get more greener change in the future because you already used up all of this capital. Which means on our side of the house, even without doing anything, we're able to actually engage with the grassroots movement, which means that we are more likely going to get change in the future. For all those reasons, it is clear opposition.
Alright, thank you all for replying to the speech. Now to end the debate, I'd like to invite Gus to reply. Here we go.
Started my speech in 3, 2, 1. We don't want a world where timber companies suddenly have more money to keep on exploitation. They never prove to you why at the end of the day their world serves the environment better. The only benefit that comes from their exclusivity is that they somehow protect the lives of specific timber industry people. We tell you we still do that, which is not exclusive to only them, right? Understand first thing, assumptions under their case, right? Firstly, they're not an extremely negative case, no exclusive benefits came from their side. But secondly, they have assumption that governments are suddenly are the richest people in the world, richest entities who have money to subsidize corporations and whatnot in order to have better green technology or whatnot, right? Number one, understand which sets protect environment and biodiversity in the current status, right? We tell you from the money we get from corporations, even if we are able to stop the excessive logging, we're at least able to use the money to funnel into protection of biodiversity inside, right? Under the current status quo, what happens is that you have to use taxpayer money to protect the biodiversity. You have to use taxpayer money to protect the damages occurred. Under their world, they never prove to you why the taxpayer money is not important, right? We tell you that's worse because under their world, you're using the money of people they want to protect to help environment. At least under our world, government has the extra money that they can funnel and not use the taxpayer money to protect that. We tell you when they come up with the why should an all industry, which is the all industry doesn't have the responsibility of timber industries harm doing. We tell you even if they go, we tell you this allows normalization, which in turn helps like better taxation and whatnot. But thirdly, we said protects people on the ground better. We tell you we do eventually protect the people in the timber industry as well as people individually. Understand, we're literally suffering from climate change. They cannot come up and tell you that climate change doesn't matter because it's a future problem. We're sitting in an air-conditioned room because outside it's too hot to even survive. That is because of climate change. People are losing their lives. Animals are dying daily, which affects your ability to get food production. There are multiple effects that are affecting us on a daily. You can know that regulations like UDR that I have talked about in my first thing would never exist to curb the production of timber products, right? If it was so, governments would not have spent billions and billions of money and R&D to stop the excessive production of logging. They would not have spent billions and billions of money on regulation to stop the excessive unsustainable practices of timber industry. You needed to prove that why that does work. But thirdly, they tell you how that inflation occurs. We tell you even if we bite the bullet and say, okay, inflation occurs, but at the longer run, you literally help the climate, which is literally protecting sustainable environment. They can suddenly leave. Understand, we protect people on the better because number one, we're not using their money to fund government, but secondarily, we're literally protecting the land that they live on. You have to live in the environment to survive. You cannot just go to Elon Musk and go to Mars and suddenly not care about the environment. You have to protect the very environment that they live on so that you can protect their lives. We tell you, sure, they have financial problems, but secondly, they don't have as much a financial problem because it eventually settles us, or at least government is able to use their money into it. But which side has more money? We tell you government doesn't suddenly have access to a lot of money that they talk about. For you to get practices or for regulations to actually be implemented in a proper way, you need money, you need resources. We tell you on my very first speech that R&D's forest management exists, sure, but they're not enough because they do not have funding. Forest officers do not have sufficient salaries to be incentivized to stay at the job. We tell you that money only comes when you tax these corporations who are killing people, who are literally killing trees without any expectation. Under our work, we serve people that they talk about. We serve animals who they don't care about. We serve environment that they have to live about, but suddenly doesn't care about. Our world has exclusive benefits and they never touched on our biodiversity prioritization, which still stands at the end of the debate because we are protecting the biodiversity, which is very vulnerable for all these union practices.
Alright, thank you both teams for the round. You can cause applause, shake hands.